Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and petrol heads all around the world, welcome to episode 8 of F1 Radio. F1 Radio is your dedicated source of anything and everything you need to know in the world of Formula 1. We bring you all the latest paddock gossip and racing rumours, as well as reviewing Grand Prix events and answering your questions in the listeners' Q&A segment. Come rain or shine, F1 Radio is your dedicated Formula 1 podcast, airing on every Grand Prix week on podcast services across the internet for your amusement. If you like what you hear, follow us on Twitter @_F1 Radio to let us know what you think about the show and to send us your F1 related questions that, if you are lucky enough, we will answer in a future episode. I'm your host, Tom Fenton, and as always, joining me today is the editor-in-chief of ReadMotorsport.com and Autosport Junior, Josh Till.
Yes, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 8 now of F1 Radio. It's going really well. Thank you all for the support, and let's get on with what will be our final race report of the season.
If you didn't already know, every F1 Radio episode is split into 3 juicy segments to ensure every wheel nut is tightened correctly before the episode leaves the pit box and into your various devices. Let's start off with what is and forever will be the Weekly Watch. In today's episode, we have 3 news items to discuss in the world of Formula 1. So Josh, let's begin with news item 1 that relates to the post-Abu Dhabi Grand Prix testing currently taking place and specifically the return of Robert Kubica.
Yes, indeed. He's now apparently the overwhelming favourite for the Williams seat. Of course, Felipe Massa kind of opted out. We kind of mentioned on the last episode, of course, announcing his second retirement from Formula 1. So he's out of the picture now, and it seems to be that Kubica's pretty nailed onto that seat. He's just done a test in Abu Dhabi, and we're recording this on the Tuesday night, so we've seen his first day of running. He's also going to be back in the car for the Wednesday as well. Of course, you guys listening will know about now. But yeah, he seemed to do a pretty good job today. He completed over 100 laps and set a fairly competitive lap time as well. So really, this just seems to be the very final stages for Williams, just confirming what they kind of already know, but also answering a few unanswered questions. Of course, not all of those questions will be able to be answered. But in terms of, Kubica himself, he said this quote, and he said, probably I'm physically in my best shape, by far a better shape than I was when I was racing in 2010. So of course he's said that about his kind of physical fitness now, and he's saying he's fitter than he was at the peak of his F1 career. So clearly I think he has the motivation, he has the confidence in himself, the belief, but it's a question, are Williams going to kind of share that belief? And it's certainly looking like they are, because he is, Tom, the overwhelming favourite.
Yeah, obviously Sergei Sirotkin's got a good chance of being the outside contender. So realistically, that means he has no chance. It looks like you've said, that Kubica, it's just the last few questions, making sure everything is okay for him to obviously participate in a full season of Formula 1. So that basically means Williams are sorted out, and I believe only Sauber is left, one or two seats there. So I don't know who's testing the Sauber, if they are even participating in this test, Josh.
Yeah, it's Leclerc and Ericsson in the Sauber, so I think that kind of confirms that those two will be driving next year for Sauber, and poor Antonio Giovinazzi will not get a seat. But looking like Kubica will. And Tom, do you think that's the right choice for Williams?
I'd like to think that regardless of what Williams thinks, that Kubica deserves another chance in F1 if he's fit enough and if he feels like he can do it, because a lot of the champions of today say he's arguably one of the best racers they've ever competed against. So, if we can get him in a good car, Williams will hopefully be a good car. Obviously, they are going to have to worry about trying to stay in the midfield, because it looks like they're on a slight downwards curve. But Kubica is very good, and if they can provide him with a good car, and even if he has a good year in Williams, who knows what doors will be open in 2019. So ultimately, I think this is great news, and it's nice to see him, one of the favourites of the fans, I think, of who can remember him at least, because it's been over almost 10 years. I think he last raced in 2010, so a very long time since we've seen him.
It is a good story, yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of hype as well, of course, about obviously, what Kubica used to be able to do, and the Kubica of old, of course, if he was coming back to Formula One, that would be great. But I'm just got, still a few question marks over, what is he really going to be able to do, and where is the trajectory going to go? I mean, is he just going to be a bit of a midfield driver? What are his prospects really like? I mean, he's not quite, of course, the Robert Kubica of 2010 either, and he's 32 now, so he's of course not going to be getting any younger, and will be 33 in about a week's time. So, for me, I think of course it is a great story, and certainly this kind of build up to it. But my kind of slight niggling concern in the back of my mind, and really has been since day one, is if he gets that seat, then it could be a bit of a disappointing 2018 if it kind of falls a little flat. And also, I mean, just imagine if you got the seat and then had to be kind of eased out either mid-season or after a year. It would be a pretty painful experience. But then again, it is a really good feel-good story, and like you say, there really is a potential for really, really good things for Kubica. And I guess the kind of lack of strong competition for the seat, like he had it, of course, at Renault. Carlos Sainz was a big contender for that seat, and that's why he got it over Kubica. But at Williams, you've got obviously Pascal Wehrlein, who I think I would personally put in the seat, but I know Williams probably won't. You got the kind of Martini kind of deal there as well, although there does seem to be a bit of a leeway with them possibly ending their partnership at the end of 2018. You got Danny Kvyat, of course, a bit of damaged goods. I think he'd be a good person to kind of bring back into Formula 1 in maybe in a couple of years' time, but honestly he needs a bit of rebuilding away from F1, I believe. And then, you got Sirotkin, of course, as you mentioned, and Paul di Resta as well. So yeah, I think Kvyat it's probably the best option. I don't want to use the phrase "best of a bad bunch," but Williams certainly don't have an easy choice. But either way, it's looking like it will be Kubica.
Yeah, for sure. We'll obviously keep an eye on how he progresses throughout winter testing, and that is, of course, if he is chosen. And of course, I think eyes will be on him in Australia, regardless of how fast that car is, to see exactly how he can cope. But the second news item of today's episode relates to 2018, of course, as we're entering the new season very shortly. And it's about the tyres specifically, but also they revealed a new logo for the Formula One brand that has had quite a lot of controversy, I guess. Maybe, let's just say
yes.
It's like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it, I think. And yeah, also, of course, the shark fins have been banned. So let's start off, Josh, with the tyres. And obviously, Pirelli, they have good years and then they have really bad years. And based on what we're looking at here, the specification of the tyres, it looks like it could be a poor year. But who knows? Let's hope Pirelli surprise us. So I think ultimately we now have an extra 2 compounds of dry tyres. These are the Hyper Soft, which is obviously going to be the softest tyre now, and that will be pink, and the Super Hard, which will now be orange. And in between them, of course, you have the regular tyres we've had before, but some of the colours have changed around. So, did they really need to do this, Josh? Do you not think that there were bigger problems for Pirelli to worry about than trying to add in more tyres and basically call them quite stupid names as well?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, they're kind of naming things pretty horrible. The kind of, I think, potential confusion we're going to have with, we have a kind of a red Super Soft, a purple Ultra Soft, and a pink Hyper Soft, and the Super Soft being the hardest of those on a weekend is going to be quite a strange one, for example, at Monaco. So certainly on the surface, it's bad, and I think a kind of bad image for Formula One. But really, if you kind of look deeper at it, I think it's nice that Pirelli have this massive range of tyres to choose from. It should theoretically mean that we have a kind of a more representative tyre for each track. It should mean that we have closer performance. It should mean that we have the right tyres for the right track at more often. And means that I guess the gaps between the tyres might not be too big. But I mean, potentially what I've kind of read has happened is that the kind of tyres have all been kind of shifted up a bit. So, for example, this year's Super Soft is 2018 soft, so they've all kind of gone back a bit. And apparently the Ultra Soft and Hyper Soft are both kind of new compounds for 2018. They're both going to be a step softer. Hamilton said he was very happy with the tyres after running, this, of course, like I mentioned, Tuesday in Abu Dhabi. So seems to be some promising signs. The car should be a lot quicker. But I think as we kind of talked about before. I think we just want kind of high degradable tyres, just to kind of, and tyres that kind of make the strategy a bit more exciting, because the whole point of 3 tyre compounds, and we kind of saw this to begin with in 2016, but it kind of faded into 2017, is that you really have 3 realistic tyres to kind of choose from for your race strategy. Whereas kind of this year we just had 2, and then the third, the hardest compound of the weekend was basically used if you got damage on lap 1 and wanted to run to the end. It was a pretty kind of pointless compound. I'm also told there's the super hard compound as well, the orange walled tyre compound is not going to be used as well. It's just going to be kind of used as a complete emergency if something goes completely wrong. So really, we don't have that compound to think about, and which is quite fortunate, I think, for the commentators, and some kind of awkward lines, I think, about drivers putting on that certain set of tyres.
Yeah, indeed. I think if we take a sort of perspective from the casual fan, it makes things a little bit more confusing as well. I mean, I know not everybody who watches F1 really cares about the tyres in terms of the difference, but now you're adding an extra few compounds into the mix, it's going to be even more confusing for those people. So, ultimately we all know what the problems are with F1. We need closer racing, so closer competition, and the cars need to be followed more closely. But like you said, Josh, in an era where we don't refuel, I think we do also need to have 2-3 stop races as well. So if Pirelli have done that, and like you said, obviously have found softer compounds that degrade higher, then that would be very good news. But the second part of this story is the controversial part, and that is the logo, Josh. So we've all seen the new logo. Originally, the FIA or Liberty Media announced or showed off 3 different types of logos they were considering, and then they chose one of those. And obviously, if you haven't seen it, just go to the F1 website or on Twitter, you'll see it. So what are your impressions of it, Josh?
I don't care. I don't watch F1 for the logo. There's been a lot of kind of noise about it. I mean, sure, okay, it's not great, but I'm really warming to it more, especially if you see it on a black background. It looks really good. I'm sure they'll take that feedback on board, and we'll probably adjust it as well, and maybe adjust kind of the font as well. So really, okay, it's not ideal, but really, we're all going to get over it by Melbourne. I think they've very strategically placed it at the end of the season, so we have kind of all winter to get over it when we turn up in Melbourne, and really no one's saying a goose about it.
Yeah, I agree that it doesn't really make a difference to the racing at all. I like it. I think it looks nice. I understand that it's maybe could be better, but like I said on Twitter, that I guarantee you that nobody will be complaining about it, and I think a lot of people will start to warm to it, like yourself. And then just the final part on this news, Josh, is again about the shark fins. They have been banned, and well, I think this is good news overall.
Yeah, I'd like to see the T-wings banned as well. I don't know if they are or not. They seem to be. I mean, to be fair, originally they said the shark fins were banned, and then they said they were allowed, and now saying they're banned again. So we'll have to see basically what happens in winter testing next year. But I'd like to see both of them go, really, in terms of the aesthetic of the car. Again, not groundbreaking, didn't ruin 2017 for me, but I think would be a nice small not addition, a removal for 2018.
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. So the last news item of this episode is an interesting one, Josh. Why don't you explain it to the listeners?
Yeah, well, first, kind of word of warning, it's from the Daily Mail, so take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, I would not usually cite the Daily Mail for anything, but for this one, we'll make an exception, because it's a bit of it's one that's been kind of floated around before, so I think there is some water to it. And apparently plans are emerging for a 6-race, women-only motor racing championship with the champion promised an F1 test drive. So this means that the kind of organisers, it all sounds a bit wishy-washy, but the organisers apparently are going to get together a load of female racers that are already kind of racing in kind of, GP3, Formula 3, Formula 4, whatever, established racers in their own right, in the junior single-seaters. They're going to bring them all together, and the winner is going to get an F1 test drive. And this is the kind of hope that maybe it'll increase female involvement in F1, or this series that they create would have some kind of parity with F1, justification, of course, from people like Carmen Jordan and other supporters of this series, which I think there are few and far between supporters of this series. That it's, other sports do it, so why don't F1, why don't motorsport do it? They kind of segregate men and women, and they say women can't compete on a same level to men. Apparently, they don't have the physical capability, they don't have the the sponsorship capability. But Tom, I think it's absolutely rubbish. I don't know what you think, but I think it's completely unnecessary and would be a major, major backward step.
I've always thought that motorsport is one of the sports where the difference, if there is a difference, has to be so minute that they can compete in the both, both male and females can compete in the same race, for example. Obviously, in other sports, maybe like rugby or tennis, it's slightly different because women will have different strengths to men and vice versa. But when there's a car involved, that takes away a lot of the differences that people complain about that apparently exist, which I'm sure there are some differences, there has to be, but whether or not it would affect performance, I'm not aware of. But in some ways I like this because maybe it will inspire young girls to try and get into motorsport, but at the same time I think, to get a woman in Formula 1, they need to be competing against the men as well. They're, competing against other women isn't going to tell you how good they are because there's not a lot of women who are competing in motorsport compared to men. Whereas, if a woman wins the GP2 title, then she must be good. It's the same as a guy. So, although this is good, it promotes it. I hope it's not basically going to generate a female version of F1, because I do honestly believe that women and men should be competing in the same races, same categories. There shouldn't be a separate organisation or competition. You shouldn't split the genders is what I'm saying. But yeah, if it promotes more women in F1 or more women in motorsport or whatever, then I guess that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd rather have something like a kind of winter series for kind of female karters maybe, and then the winner of that gets a big scholarship to kind of race full time in Formula 4 with women and men. I think that's probably the way forward. You can definitely increase involvement of women by not having this championship. It's, I think, pretty pointless, and I think the best thing would just be to put more funding in at a grassroots level, and then that'll just be followed up, and eventually we'll kind of get to a stage where we do get young girls wanting to do go-karting a lot more than I think now, and I think if you can kind of start it from there, I think the rest will follow, really. I don't think you even need to do too much at a higher level if you sorted out the lower level, because people will stand up and notice, in racing. And to be honest, I don't think in terms of sponsorship that, gender, certainly once you get to about Formula 4 level, is any hindrance, because I think if anything, it's almost an advantage, because if you look at Formula 4, say German Formula 4, one of the most kind of well-known names is Sophia Flörsch, of course, who's female racing driver. And I'm not saying she's popular because she's a female, but I think there is a certain aspect that does even help that. So I think that's, not a problem really, and it's kind of fixing a problem that isn't really there. I think the bigger problem is at a grassroots level, and as I mentioned, a few various better ideas, I think, floating around. You only need to find them really on Twitter. But yeah, I think this will hopefully not come to fruition, but again, it's a developing story that we'll have to keep an eye on.
I completely agree. You've got to sort out the foundation before you can build the house.
Yes, well said, Tom. Shall we move on?
Indeed. And with that awkward silence, it is time for Racing Report.
Today's Racing Report is the 2017 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Not, Tom, the greatest ever F1 season finale, but it was a race nonetheless. It caps off what's been an interesting season, of course the first year of a new era of Formula 1. It was run by Valtteri Bottas, of course, his third win of the season, his third win with Mercedes, and of course it was a Mercedes 1-2, utter domination from them. Bottas, of course, first, Hamilton second. Vettel completed the podium for Ferrari, of 20 seconds back from Bottas, and then it was Raikkonen in fourth, Max Verstappen closely following in fifth, and it was Nico Hülkenberg in sixth. A really, really good result for Renault. Great strong pace for them. They clinched sixth in the constructor standings thanks to those 8 points from Hülkenberg. Then it was the two Force Indias, Perez and Ocon in 7th and 8th. Great year for Force India, of course, well clear in 4th place. Fernando Alonso, not such a good year for him with McLaren, but they cap off their time together in 9th, and it's Felipe Massa rounding out the top 10 in his final race in Formula 1. We had Grosjean, Van Dorn, Magnussen, Verline, Hartley, Gasly and Ericsson completing the non-point scoring finishes. And we had Sainz and Ricciardo also retiring. Did I mention Stroll finishing? I don't know. Stroll's in 18th. Sainz and Ricciardo both retired with various failures. Been a difficult season for both of them with various reliability issues, and I guess it seems pretty fitting for both of them to retire in the final race. But anyway, Tom, let's talk about Valtteri Bottas, his third win of the year, and could he do a Nico Rosberg? I've seen this kind of line all over social media. Do we think that Bottas could possibly do a bit of a Rosberg? Think back to 2015 when Hamilton won the title, took his foot off the gas, and Rosberg sneaked in, won all the last races, and then went on to win the championship the following year.
Well, you never know. I mean, who would have said that Rosberg, after his pretty abysmal 2015 campaign, would have gone on to win the 2016 season? So Bottas, he is a very skillful driver, and it's all about mental strength now, I think, for Bottas. Maybe in some ways the same situation as it was with Rosberg. Bottas now knows that in a clean race with Hamilton, he can beat him. Now, I know people have said, well, Hamilton was faster in the race. Yeah, but where it counts, which is qualifying and the first lap of the race, Bottas beat Hamilton. And that's all that's all you need to do. And that's what Hamilton, Vettel, Rosberg have done for the last, or ever since this era has started of F1. It's all about getting into the lead in turn one, and then you're pretty much guaranteed, barring reliability, to win that race. So Bottas did what he needed to do where it counts. Yes, we have to take a consideration that Hamilton has, and it looks like he always does this, calms down and takes his foot off the gas once he's won the championship, which is fair enough because realistically, it doesn't matter anymore. He's done what he needs to do. Nobody's going to really care if he won another race or two in the season. So maybe it's bad that he's going to let his teammate have some more confidence, but this is one race, isn't it? And Rosberg, I think, had 4 races at the end of the season where he won, got pole, etc. So we'll see. And I like Bottas a lot. I think he's a really good guy. I think he's a great racer, but I don't know if he's got the mental strength to compete with people like Vettel, Hamilton, etc. But we'll find out next year. So yeah, I think he can do it. It's just all about whether he can put himself in this mindset, which he was going on about after the race, saying that if he can put himself in these mindsets where he's comfortable with the car, etc., he can do very well, like he did in Abu Dhabi. But I think maybe more to the point of the performance of Mercedes this weekend was incredible, and I know there was rumours that Ferrari are trying 2018 parts and that maybe they weren't really at the races, but still it was looking like a Mercedes of 2015 or 2014.
Yeah, it was definitely a pretty frightening pace from them. I think in terms of Bottas, as you mentioned, he's definitely got the potential to have a really, really strong 2018. But I think he definitely needs that, otherwise he could get replaced for the following year. His contract's up at the end of next year, so it's going to be a really, really crucial one for him. Obviously, Rosberg won the last 3 races of 2015 and then hit the ground running in 2016 with 4 in a row. So I think that's something for Bottas to really aim for, and we'll probably find out if he is going to be a title contender next year within those first few races. As you mentioned, Mercedes frighteningly quick. They kind of said it was a bit of a one-off, as did Kimi Räikkönen as well. So we'll have to see. I mean, the track's basically completely geared towards Mercedes. It's pretty much all their kind of strong areas. But I think it reminded us really that Ferrari are still a bit down on power compared to Mercedes, and that's definitely one of those things for them to look at for next year. It was a bit kind of similar to what they did in Monza. I'd probably compare it to, where Mercedes were just that dominant, and the win for them was never in doubt, and of course getting a 1-2 as well. A great way for Mercedes to end what's been a great year. I mean, we sometimes forget to mention it, but they're just doing a fantastic job. This was definitely, of course, their toughest year, facing finally a bit of competition, and it's fair to say they crushed them. Very, very few mistakes, and Tom, one frightening thing I think was the lack of poor reliability from Mercedes, something that we have seen over the past 3 years, a bit of poor reliability creeping in. But this year, it was pretty much nowhere to be seen.
That's true. I think obviously they've got their engine sorted to a T. It's pretty much bulletproof. I was saying at the beginning of the season how bulletproof Ferrari were, but Mercedes are on the next level clearly. They still have little issues here and there, but for an F1 car, it's virtually impossible to break down, and that's great for when you need to attack. That's when you need to actually try and take back a position from potentially a Ferrari or a Red Bull who is ahead of you. They've got the ability to turn the engine up, not have a lot of worries, whereas like you said in the previous seasons, especially in 2014, they had to really concern themselves about their engines, just like everybody else did back then. But Mercedes, let's hope it was a one-off, because we don't want to have another season of domination. And this season's been great, and I've enjoyed having a realistic competitor to Mercedes, but we don't want to go back to 2015, 16 and 14 where there's just a one car team that's guaranteed to win, and it's really, really boring. But moving on from Mercedes, Ferrari, I guess, had a very quiet day. They did what they had to do. Kimi Raikkonen quite far behind Vettel, but Kimi Raikkonen seems like the type of guy who probably would give up anyway once he knows the championship's over and there's no point in fighting. I guess the next talking topic is the third place team, Red Bull. Verstappen did okay. He couldn't get past Kimi. That was really the big problem. I think he probably could have maybe been more of a threat to Vettel if he would have jumped Kimi Raikkonen in the pit stops. That was not the case. And then obviously, unfortunately for Ricciardo, who qualified very well, he had was it an engine or a hydraulic failure, and that was such a shame for him to finish that way, because it allowed Kimi Raikkonen to jump him in the Drivers' Championship.
Yeah, really big shame for Ricciardo. He's really had the brunt of the bad luck at Red Bull in the second half of the year. Verstappen had it in the first, and overall, really disappointing season for Red Bull. Consider where their kind of expectations were coming into the season. They were, kind of billed as going to be taking the fight to Mercedes, and you kind of look at the end of the season and they're a distant third best team. And Ricciardo, probably one of his best weekends of the season. Thwarted, of course, by that hydraulic failure, but without that, I think he'd been right in the back of Vettel. Verstappen, a bit of an off weekend for him, but really, I don't think it's going to make much difference. He doesn't seem to go too well at Abu Dhabi, actually. If you look at kind of a couple of years ago as well, he didn't go too well, but I don't think it's too much to worry, and that's going to be a really strong team heading into next year, and they need to do a lot of work over the winter, but I think the main brunt of the work has to go to Renault.
Yes, they definitely deserve all the praise, and they're probably the second most excited team from Mercedes at Abu Dhabi this weekend. Obviously, Nico Hülkenberg getting that crucial 6th place, which enabled them, or shall I say Renault, the team, to gain 6th place in the championship, clinch it off Toro Rosso in the final race, which was obviously a little bit controversial considering Renault and Toro Rosso have been having a few bad words in recent times, but I think it was guaranteed, regardless of how well Toro Rosso were going to perform anyway, because they were out of the picture, and we've all known that Renault, maybe by and large this season, have had the 4th quickest car, maybe 5th, shall I say, behind the Force India. So going into Abu Dhabi, it was pretty nailed on that if they if they performed where their car should be, that they probably should leapfrog Toro Rosso, and I think overall they deserve it, considering they had basically a one-car team for the majority of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Renault really should have finished the season in 5th and be challenging Force India really for 4th. But of course, it didn't go that way. Partly because, of course, as you mentioned, they had Julian Palmer in one of their cars for the majority of the season. And the other main factor, of course, being really poor reliability, means they just haven't been able to maximise the results. It's a thing that they really need to change for 2018. I think it goes without saying. But you've got McLaren taking the Renault engines as well, so there's going to be big pressure on Renault. But kind of high risk but high reward for them, because if they cannot get it right, they've got 3 teams there that could really be challenging for podiums and wins, and that'll be a real force next year if they get it right. And at the moment, I think that's a very big if, because although McLaren might be leaving one disaster of an engine manufacturer, they could be kind of heading for another one which has got quite a few problems, particularly compared to Mercedes and Ferrari.
Yes, obviously Renault are down on power. maybe not as dramatically as Honda, but they are still down, and it still looks like it's significant enough to stop teams like Red Bull being consistent threats each and every weekend. So, like you said, it's a big if, because you got to remember the goalposts are moving as well. Mercedes and Ferraris aren't going to stand still. Their engines are going to be better next year. So let's say if, for example, Renault were down, I think they said roughly 6% on the internal combustion unit. So let's say that was overall, their whole engine was 6% down. They've really got to find maybe 10%, because, you can't tell me that Mercedes and Ferrari are only going to find 1% or 2% in performance. So they've got to make a big jump. And like you said, the pressure is on. They've got 3 teams now who all want to win championships. I think Renault are aiming for 2019 to be a considered threat, but McLaren and Red Bull, they want to be winning next year. Obviously, Alonso's very hungry, and he's hoping that's going to be the case. And McLaren and Red Bull are teams that can often deliver very good chassis. So imagine if it's not just Christian Horner, but Eric Boullier as well, hounding Renault about the engine performance. But it'll be an interesting time at Renault in 2018, because rumours are that they are going to drop Red Bull at the end of 2018. Whether or not this is true, obviously, is very much a rumour. There's no concrete evidence yet, but it's looking that way in my opinion. So maybe Christian Horner is going to have to be careful about what he says next year. But ultimately, Honda is what Christian Horner is hoping is going to be his lifesaver, and then he won't have to worry about what Renault do, because he'll have his own engine to do with whatever he wants with.
Yeah, that's a pretty unreliable saver, though, unfortunately.
Indeed.
It's it's like Renault or Honda. Which one do you think is going to do better in terms of either of them even going to be able to match Mercedes and Ferrari? It's a pretty big if, and a sticky situation for them. But I guess good for Formula One. Well, no, not good for. It's bad for Formula One, because we kind of want Red Bull up there, we want McLaren up there, we want Renault up there, and if Renault get it right, we get 4 teams fighting for the championship next year. If Renault get it wrong, or they just do what they did last year, then pretty much we're going to have 2 teams up there again. So I think the fate of Formula One, to put it dramatically, heavily relies on Renault's engine department. I'd say over the winter, but probably the kind of wheels are already set in motion. The decisions have probably already been made. But any more extra work over the winter, Renault, will be much appreciated, so we have a much more exciting year next year.
Yeah, definitely. So before we move on to the rest of the teams, there's only one more thing that we need to say about Renault, and that is during the race, basically they didn't tighten up their wheel nuts correctly. Just like we say at the beginning of this show, to make sure that we deliver the podcast in a very nice form to you guys out there. Renault didn't listen to us, and that's why they retired. And obviously Carlos Sainz lost potentially 10th, 9th position in this race. So that is a shame, but overall it didn't make a difference for them in the Constructors' battle. And so I guess we move on to Force India, Josh. Overall, a little quiet weekend for them, but yet again, they're very consistent, solid, 7th and 8th, and within, I think, 4 or so seconds of each other, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, they've pretty much been like that all season. I think Perez has kind of got the upper hand a bit now in the last couple of races, after, Ocon was pretty much kind of driving that team forward. Perez kind of frustrated with team orders last few races, but these last couple he's managed to get ahead. Which I think is the best way, really. If you've got team orders, then just make sure you're the leading car on the road, and that's what he's done in the last couple of races. So really exciting driver lineup for next year, of course, with both of them staying on, and a real exciting fight for probably 4th in the Constructors again. I think a lot of people are going to count them out over the winter. A lot of people are going to say, Renault and McLaren will jump them. But honestly, if they just keep doing what they're doing, then there is great potential for them just to be that consistent threat next year, and possibly even, reclaim 4th or 5th would still be a fantastic achievement next year. And I really do think, a kind of early prediction is, I do think one of them's going to beat, Force India are going to beat one of either Renault or McLaren, because they're just, they're just uber consistent, and they seem to got a bit more backing as well next year. So yeah, great job from them in this race, and great job from them all year. Talk about Alonso.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's look towards McLaren and Williams. Alonso did very well yet again, and actually Stoffel Van Dorn did okay as well. again, proving that the chassis is there, but just the power is not. And what a race by Massa. I think he was a lot more impressive in qualifying than in the race, because ultimately the car really wasn't there in the race. But when you compare what was happening to his teammate, and I know they're saying that there might have been issues with the car, but throughout the weekend, Massa really showed that Stroll, has got a lot of learning to do.
Yeah,
and throughout the whole season, I would say, to be fair.
Yeah, I think Massa going out on a high. He had a bit of a slump mid-season, as he sometimes does in his F1 career, but really he's got gone and ended his F1 career on a high with two really, really good races in Brazil and Abu Dhabi, so he can go out with his head held high. Lance Stroll, like you said, a lot of learning to do. This is an awful weekend for him. He was so far off the pace. He had 3 pit stops, flat spotted his tyres, and everything just went wrong for Stroll this weekend. And there'll be big pressure on him next year as well, because of course he'll have a new teammate, and it's his kind of second year. You can kind of hide
especially if it's Kubica.
Exactly, there'll be a lot of tension there, and I think it'd be good for Kubica though if it is Stroll, because it'll make it a little easier for him to beat Stroll. Jack Villeneuve as well saying that Stroll should have a slow teammate that would help him along, so. That's a bit of a jab there, of course, from fellow Canadian Jack Villeneuve. Not really needed, but for Stroll, yeah, he probably does need that, to be fair, because he's having a pretty difficult rookie season. But he has shown the flashes of speed. That Baku podium, no one can take that away from him. No one can take away his brilliant front row start in Monza as well. So he's had a good enough rookie year, I'd say. Those highs have kind of cancelled out the lows. If this was, of course, a kind of a normal midfield team, if this was just Force India, he would be out the door. Well, he wouldn't have been standing in the first place, but he would be out the door. But luckily, for him, this is Williams, a team that, of course, he's got a lot of investment in, as his father has. So he gets to stick around, have another season. And if they could just, get rid of these lows, there are quite a lot of them, and just get more highs, then he could have a very bright future.
Yeah, I totally agree. I guess the final few words we should talk about are the few teams who failed to score on any points this weekend, and so that is Haas, Ferrari, Sauber, Toro Rosso. So, Toro Rosso really weren't at the races. Arguably the slowest car. Obviously, they've got Pierce Gasly and Brennan Hartley in the car, so they're both relatively new drivers. But Wehrlein was ahead of both of them in 14th place, and Haas were. I've got concerns about not only their car, but their driver lineup going into next year, because Romain Grosjean just seems like a calmer version of Kevin Magnussen, but even then, Grosjean seems to get flustered sometimes, and I think he did okay. But
I think it was a good race. It was a good race from him. He got 16th to 11th, some good moves, good move on Stroll. But I know what you mean. I mean, it's not an exciting lineup, really. But I think it's okay for a midfield team. It's pretty solid for Grosjean.
But that's the problem, isn't it? It's okay for a midfield team. They want to be higher than a midfield team, surely.
Yeah, but I mean, they can't sign a top driver without having a quick car. I think that kind of car has to come first. They kind of doesn't put too much attention on them. Haas in general, I think, have done a good job, in this second year. Compared to last year, right, they had Grosjean on Gutierrez, so Magnussen's definitely an upgrade on Gutierrez, so I think they're going in a decent direction, bit of stability for next year. Let's see what they can do. We'll give them a chance. And Toro Rosso as well. They kind of shot themselves in the foot. They lost 6th place in the constructors as soon as they signed Hartley and Gasly. That's no kind of discredit to those two, but just changing the lineup so late in the season. It's two drivers that really haven't had any experience of Formula One in a very long time, or much in Gasly's case. Was always going to be a bad move, really. I think they've been okay. They haven't set F1 alight. I don't think they're going to be future champions. And is that really what Toro Rosso need? Because so often in the past they've had those future champions. So again, we talk about people being under pressure for next year. I think both of them are under a lot of pressure for next year. The team certainly is with Honda as well. So yeah, an end of an era for Toro Rosso, but a start of a brand new one next year with Honda. Verlaine's last race, great race from him. Really hope he sticks around next year. Probably isn't going to. Ericsson probably will. Not a good race from him. Van Dorn, like you say, not too bad as well.
Yeah, overall, it was quite a dull race in comparison to some of the races we've had in the last few years. And there's some people who've been saying about the track, should it be changed, the layout. I think Abu Dhabi's tracks, the circuit's fine, personally. I don't see why it needs to change. I understand that maybe overtaking could be improved a lot, but if we look throughout the whole season, there's been a lot of races where there's been a little overtaking because these cars are so difficult to follow. So I really think they should keep Abu Dhabi's layout. Personally, they can try and experiment if they want to, but I just don't see why they need to, because I think we've seen some good racing in the past at Abu Dhabi, personally.
Yeah, I mean, anyone in doubt, just watch the kind of Formula 2 sprint race there. Leclerc, gaining loads and loads of positions to win that race. There is not a problem with the track, it's the cars. It's always been the cars. It's the cars at pretty much every track. There are bad circuits on the calendar. Abu Dhabi's probably up there. But really, there are no circuits where it should be impossible to have good races, really. We should still be able to have them. And it is, they've got to be the cars. We've got to look at that. Liberty Media have a massive job on their hands. Let's not underestimate it. They've changed the logo, a bit of a brand, a bit of a move away from Bernie Ecclestone, I think. That was their kind of thinking behind that. And now they've got to do the same with the cars. They've got to do the same with philosophy, forget kind of making, attractive cars to look at or whatever, or just kind of road relevant cars. Let's just get entertaining cars that are going to produce entertaining races, which in turn, and the rest will follow, basically. If you just have entertaining races, everything's going to fall into line. And that starts with the cars. So let's get them changed to 2020, 2019. 2019, please, would be ideal, but I think 2021 is probably a bit more realistic along with the engines. And then you can just bring in Ross Brawn's vision of Formula 1, what it should be. And that will be a very, very nice day. It's just a shame we have to wait 3 years.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've heard some comments of what Ross Brawn's been talking about, and it sounds really good. But yes, typical in Formula 1. Even now we've got rid of what some people would say was a problem in Bernie Ecclestone. We still have to wait. Things take time, and it's a shame that we can't make quicker changes like in other sports. But listen, there's a lot of changes that happen in other sports every year, and they're planned 5-10 years in advance. So let's not pretend like F1 is just one of these sports that's very slow and doesn't respond to what people want. There's a lot of politics involved in F1, which is a problem because teams in some ways govern the sport, which is not the right way it should be. But either way, this is going down a rabbit hole that I'm sure we can discuss over the winter, Josh, and in 2018 as well. So yeah, this has been the final racing report of the 2017 season that we have provided to you on F1 Radio. I hope you've enjoyed the racing reports, but of course we haven't finished yet, Josh. We're almost at the checker flag of this race and in general of this season. But before we cross that line, before we finish the season, what is it time for, Josh?
It is time for the final segment of the show where we answer a question, or in this case questions, submitted by you, the listeners, the F1 radio community. It's time for the questionable queries.
What the hell is happening in an exit on 12? I have no over if I don't push the K1. Do we really think that the tires will last at the end of the race? Because it doesn't feel like it. Do you really want that I keep going? Because it's just absolute.
So, Josh, what's today's topic of conversation and who asks?
Well, we've got our friends from Motorsport 101, Andre Harrison and Ryan King, have kind of come with a bit of a combined question. King, of course, finishing Dre's sentence for not the first time. And their basic kind of question is what's going to happen to Antonio Giovinazzi and Pascal Wehrlein next year, of course, both who seems to be ousted from Sauber. Giovinazzi, of course, did a couple of races for them, filling in for Wehrlein at the start of the year. Big contender for the seat next year, but looking like he's going to miss out, or possibly on the Alfa Romeo seat, depending on who you ask. I'll answer this one first, and then King, you can... Tommy, you can jump in and give your thoughts. But for me, Giovinazzi, I don't think he's going to be in Formula 1, unfortunately. His other options are probably going to be quite limited, which is a shame because he's such a talented driver. He'll probably still chase an F1 seat, perhaps, maybe do a few practice runs again for Haas or Sauber. Needs to crash a little bit less and impress a little bit more when he does those FP1 sessions, but I think he needs a full-time race series seat as well, and that's hopefully what he will get, possibly in the World Endurance Championship, possibly if F1 doesn't work out, Formula E, especially if Ferrari are going to be entering Formula E under the kind of Fiat name, or even just with a totally different outfit in Formula E. That would be really nice because he's a very, very talented single-seater racer. but also very talented in sports cars as well. So possibly something like that, or even DTM for him next year. Verline, hopefully some kind of reserve role, I think, within Formula One. And again, last year for Mercedes in DTM, so it'd be nice for their kind of former champion to go and try and win another title for Mercedes. So Tom, Giovinazzi and Verline, first of all, do you see them getting in F1 next year? And if not, do you think they should give up on the dream?
Well, I guess unless we have another shock retirement like we had last season with Rosberg, I don't see either of these getting anywhere close to a drive. I've said this many times that I think Sauber's going to be Leclerc and Ericsson, and I think that's pretty nailed on. I don't see how Giovinazzi or Pascal Wehrlein can disrupt these plans. Maybe Giovinazzi because he's Italian, and if there's an Alfa Romeo connection, who knows? But I highly doubt that's going to happen. And it depends on how much influence Alfa Romeo are going to have over the Sauber team. Because if it basically means that Ericsson's backers are no longer involved with the Sauber team, then there's a good chance Giovinazzi could be in that seat. But I don't see that happening. I think Ericsson's pretty nailed on for that Sauber drive, along with Leclerc. So, yeah, I think, like you said, Giovinazzi, very, very talented driver. I remember watching him in his first few races, and I was like, wow, this kid's great. But like you said, he crashed too many times, and it puts the hazards on, and you think, okay, this guy needs a few more years before, maybe he's suitable for F1. Verline's case, I know it sounds like I hate the guy, but I just don't think he's F1 suitable. Like, I've made my mind pretty clear about halfway through this season where I was like, no. I gave this guy a chance, and okay, if you put the personality issues aside, I'm not saying he's got an issue personality-wise, but a lot of people say he didn't get the Force India drive because of his personality, which, it looks like maybe he sorted that out, but still, you look at the stats, and compared to Ericsson, who a lot of people say is an average driver, he's not that much more impressive, in my opinion. He's done some very good things in the Sauber seat. A few times he's got into Q2, and I think he scored a point or so. And so he's done well. He's done some very good things. But I think with F1, it's one of them things where you've really got to shine when you're given that golden opportunity. And once that time's gone, you've had it. You've got to look. There's a lot of drivers on that grid who are like that. Ultimately, you're looking at Perez, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Grosjean. They all had their time. They all had a moment in their career where it was for them to really take it and show why they're a great driver. And I think, these look like drivers, including Verline, who basically, they're never going to be considered for a top drive. And unfortunately for Verline, he's not even going to get a seat. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with him. Maybe he will go to DTM. But ultimately, to answer the question, I don't see either of these guys getting a seat in F1 in 2018 or 2019, to be honest. Yeah,
it's very kind of unfortunate, I think, for both of them. I mean, I think I'm a little more sympathetic on the kind of Verline side. I really do rate him, and I think he's, those attitude kind of concerns were a little bit, kind of unfair. But, I think that's the way it is. And like you say, I think he should have probably beaten Marcus Ericsson a lot more this year than he has. And as Dre says, I mean, Giovinazzi has just kind of come at the same time as Leclerc, and that's been very, very unfortunate for him. They're two great drivers, but Leclerc, of course, just edges it, so that kind of leaves Giovinazzi in a bit of a difficult position. So, we'll see on both of them. I'm sure we'll get some announcements. That might Sauber or Alfa Romeo might have even announced their driver lineup for next year by the time you are listening to this, and all of it will be pointless. But regardless, we'll go on to the final question of the episode, and that's from Marcus Hoare, and he says, what is realistic to expect from Kubica in his first season back? He says regular lower half of the top 10. So Tom, basically, if Kubica gets the Williams seat, what are your expectations for him?
Well, obviously, a lot of that depends on the car, but let's say Williams are in the same position they are now in terms of pace. So where are they roughly? We would say maybe they've got the 5th or 6th fastest car, maybe even less. Maybe they're a bit lower than that, but let's say that they're in the top half of the teens, so we're looking at 15 to 11 probably. I I guess maybe the easiest way to describe how good I think he's going to do is compare him to Stroll. I think he will beat Stroll. I think it will be maybe not initially comfortable, but I think as the season progresses, if he finds his feet, Kubica, which I believe he will, I think he'll comfortably beat Stroll, because I think a lot of people, I know he's a lot older now and he's had his accident, but if Kubica of the old, or even part of that driver comes back, I think people will underestimate how good he is. He really is a good driver. So I don't have any concerns of him beating Stroll throughout the season. Again, it depends where the car is, but let's say he'll definitely be fighting for points as long as Williams are somewhere in the middle of the pack, because he's that type of driver who, he's a bit, from what I remember, he's a bit like Alonso, where he doesn't always do the spectacular moves, but he always seems to get himself in the position he needs to be. We all remember, countless times with Alonso throughout the last few years where he somehow got into 5th or 4th place, and you're like, how has he done this? But he does, and that's what I remember with Kubica. So that's what I would say. I think he's going to beat Stroll, and he'll be in the points for sure.
Yeah, I think he just needs to convincingly beat Stroll. I think that's the kind of goal for anyone. Just beat your teammate, basically. And if he can do it in a convincing way, then he'll certainly kind of warrant that faith that Williams would have put him in, to kind of put him in the seat for this for next year, rather. And then he can kind of build on there for kind of 2019 onwards. A lot of the reports are saying kind of 2-year deal as well. So clearly, if they're going to commit to him, they're going to commit to him for a couple of years. So not just kind of race by race or even a year. So I think that would certainly do him good, and basically I think a regular point scorer would be a big achievement, and would definitely be the goal for him, and what I'd expect. And I think that pretty much rounds out the segment of the show. Thank you to Marcus, Andre, and King for the questions.
Yeah, we thank everybody who's submitted a question for F1 Radio throughout, since the beginning of the show. In September, so we really appreciate all the questions and all the comments and support, and basically we're at the end of the season now, and that doesn't mean F1 Radio stops. Yes, we might take a little bit longer break between episodes from now on. We haven't really discussed this, Josh, but why not? Let's have a little very quick discussion about maybe our plans of what we intend to do over the winter. So I think what we are going to obviously do is a season report. That will include a ranking of the drivers, so we will rank based on our opinions, maybe not necessarily the championship and order. We will rank who we think has been the best driver of the season, and we'll do this for every driver. So I'll have a top 20 list, or 25 maybe. I don't know how many reserve drivers, but we'll see if we count them in. We'll go through, the races and highlight key moments of the season. And then also in the new year, probably January, February time, we'll start again, and we'll talk about the winter testing, or just before winter testing, we'll have a conversation about any news that may have happened over the winter, and then we will have a winter testing report, maybe in the middle and the end, or maybe just at the end, and then we get back round to Australia. I think that's the 28th of March, something like that. But do you think that's a good idea, Josh? Do you think that's what the listeners would like?
Yeah, there'll be regular content throughout the winter. There'll be plenty of stuff to keep us occupied. I'm sure we can always kind of look back on previous seasons as well. We could probably do kind of a whole episode dedicated to kind of questions, maybe even some kind of live kind of show as well. But plenty of ideas and kind of potential videos coming over the winter, of course, to keep you guys occupied. But I'm sure Melbourne will soon roll around. It might seem a very long time to go, but it will not be long before everybody's up at 5 a.m. on that Sunday, and we're watching. Well, we'll have to see who's lifting the crown or lifting the trophy in Melbourne. But hopefully, we'll be treated to a much better race in Melbourne than we were here in Abu Dhabi.
Definitely. If you guys, the listeners, have any suggestions on what we should do over the winter, I know somebody said that we should do maybe an episode based on some F1 history, then please let us know what you would like us to do between now, or even just in general during our Grand Prix episodes. So for next season, we can learn and try and change the show for you to make it more entertaining, more enjoyable, and more exciting. So let us know. Tweet us at _F1 Radio to give us your suggestions. If you've got a question that you want us to ask in the next episode, please ask. Send it to us. We don't know when the next episode is going to be.
2 weeks.
But chances are it will be somewhere within 2-3 weeks. Before the end of the year, we will have another episode out for you, reviewing the season. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. But basically, this is the end of the show. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and petrolheads all around the world, we've reached the end of this race. And in fact, we've reached the end of this season. I thank Josh for co-hosting the show with me today and all the previous shows. So thank you very much, Josh. And I also thank you, the listeners. It's people like you and I that keep this racing spirit alive in this crazy world of Formula One. So we cannot thank you enough for supporting the show throughout the season. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode across the various platforms that host F1 Radio, including iTunes, YouTube, and TuneIn, if you like what you've heard. If there's any other podcast services you would like us to put F1 Radio on, then please let us know, tweet us, or communicate to us in some way. Get a hold of us. But until next time, it's been a pleasure to serve.